Thanks for joining us for today's message. You are about to watch a message from Pastor Brenen Beeler. Today's message is from our series, Guided by God, where we are discovering God's divine direction in and for our lives as we go through the book of Exodus. We are always encouraged to hear how God is using this ministry to touch lives. If God has been transforming your life through this ministry, would you let us know? Email us at yourstory@regeneratechurch.com. Also, if you would like to help support this ministry financially, you can do so online by clicking the giving tab at regeneratechurch.com/give. Help us continue to bring messages just like this one every week to people all around the world. Now, prepare your heart to hear a word from God.
We live in a culture driven by convenience. I mean, we love things that are convenient, don't we? Fast food, we live in a microwave society. We want it fast, we want it easy. We want it, even Little Caesar's entire marketing plan is hot and ready. It's just convenient and it's easy. And we have so many things that bring convenience to our lives. We have Google Maps. We have Waze. If you're an anti-Google Maps person, you might use Waze. There's a little bit of a debate and argument between those two apps and which one's better. But those types of apps, if you don't have a smartphone, it's what a Thomas guide used to be. Anybody ever use MapQuest? How many people remember MapQuest? Young people don't even know how hard it used to be because we live in a society driven by convenience. And these apps now, they can give you the path of the least resistance. They'll take you around the traffic and give you the quickest way to get from point A to point B. Maybe you have a check that you need to deposit. Well, you don't have to drive to the bank anymore. No, you can just pull out your phone and pull up your banking app and you can deposit that check straight from your smartphone. Perhaps you're out and about, maybe at the mall or some restaurant, and there's some song that you haven't heard in a long time, and you're like, oh, I love that song. I forget what song is that. You can just ask Siri on your phone, what song is this? And she'll listen for a moment and then tell you what song it is. And not only will she tell you what song it is, she'll offer to download it for $1.29 into your iTunes. Because we live in a culture driven by convenience. We like things easy and smooth sailing, but because we live in a culture driven by convenience, we have developed the habit in our own lives of taking the path of the least resistance. Whatever's the easiest path. But the problem is the characteristic of finding the path of least resistance in our lives, the easiest, whatever's the smoothest, has destroyed something in our lives called perseverance. That when we go through opposition or difficulty, we have the strength to not be like water flowing in a different direction, but to be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work that the Lord has called us to do. Things aren't always easy. Times sometimes are tough. But when we no longer have perseverance in our lives, we can be moved out of what God has for us simply because of difficulty. Now, we don't like opposition. We don't like when there's resistance. We don't like when there's hardships or opposition and difficulty. We don't like that. But let me tell you today, resistance brings results. I want to illustrate that to you before we get in our text today, because during the pandemic when all the gyms closed down, well, these types of companies blew up. Rubber band workouts. I remember when my brother who works out called me and said, hey, you got to try this new rubber band workout. I laughed at him. I'm like, I'm not going to work out with any rubber bands. And then I started to look into it and find out what it's like to work out with one of these rubber bands. And it's called, if you do it right, resistance training. And the resistance of the rubber bands And pulling against the resistance, it causes there to be growth, development. It's the same type of thing that we do in the gym with weights and strength training. We know we have to exercise. I'm just trying to get a pump right now before I preach. We have to work out in order to be strengthened. If there's no resistance, there's no strength. And so you can buy these in all different kinds of resistance, from 5 pounds to 75 pounds, depending on how much resistance you want. And through the resistance, you can have strength. Now, if you never have resistance, spiritually speaking, in your life, you never go through difficulty, God knows you're going to be a weak person spiritually. And so God will use difficulty in our lives to develop us to be the men or the women that God has created us to be. Resistance brings results. Now, I looked up how resistance training actually works, and the definition is this, and you're gonna go crazy when you hear this. You're gonna be blown away. I can't wait for you to hear this. Resistance training works by causing microscopic damage or tears to the muscle cells, which in turn are quickly repaired by the body to help the muscles, ready for it, regenerate and grow stronger. I knew this message was inspired by God. God allows there to be resistance in our lives so that we would be trained to persevere, so that we would have the strength to go forward into all that God has called us to go into. You show me a person that is unfazed by the difficulties in their life, and I'll show you a person who's been through so much and that has had God see them through it all. Without that, we panic. Without the experience of God's faithfulness to get us to where he wants us to be, well, then we oftentimes falter and fail and walk away from the plan because it seemingly wasn't working. It wasn't what I expected. It was kind of hard or difficult, and I just got tired of doing it, because we live in that culture of taking the path of least resistance. But sometimes God will take us through things that cause resistance so that we wouldn't be a spiritually weak believer, but that we could be strengthened in our relationship with God. And today, as we come to Exodus chapter 1, we see that God guides his people, that God is faithful to get us to where he wants us to be. And in order to get us to where he wants to be, we are going to see several different ways through this series how God guides his people. If you're a person that says, you know what, I want to be guided by God, I want to step into all that God has for me, I want to live out the purpose in which I was created for, well, we're going to be looking at different ways that God guides us so that we could discover God's divine direction for our lives. But today, in this first chapter, we're going to see one of the ways that God guides us, and that is God often uses difficulty to get us to where he wants us to be. Where we no longer are just living a life of ease, but God can stir the nest, so to speak, to get us to not only step out from where we are at, but maybe to step up from where we are at. Maybe to step up from living a life of complacency in our Christianity, to step up into serving in ministry, to step up as the leader in your home that God has called you to be, to step up. And sometimes God has to stir the nest, so to speak, to get us to move not only out, but up into all that God has for us. And one of those ways that God guides us that we'll see today is through difficulty, resistance, in order to bring strength to us so that we have the strength in our faith to step out in faith into all that God has for us. because it's true. We truly are developed in difficulty. And so this book of Exodus, all about being guided by God, we're going to see that God has a plan for each of us. Let's take a look. It's Exodus chapter 1. Beginning in verse 1, it says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel," that is Jacob. We've been studying a lot about Abraham and his son Isaac and his son Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. One of those sons is named Joseph. And we looked over the last several weeks of the life of Joseph. Well, now it's going to recount the sons of Jacob who moved to Egypt. You remember they moved to Egypt because of the famine in the land, the difficulty that God allowed to happen with Jacob caused Jacob to go down to Egypt. God guided his people through the difficulty and brought them to Egypt. They lived in a land called Goshen. And Goshen was the most prosperous, fertile land. Their crops were growing. Their cattle were thriving. Everything was good. Everything was easy. Everything was pleasant. And guess what? When everything's going good, what do we think? Don't change anything. Things are going good. I want them to stay exactly the way they are. But that's not often how God works. And so they moved to Egypt with their father, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Man, I just nailed all those names. And it says in verse 5, "In all, Jacob had 70 descendants in Egypt, including Joseph, who was already there." It says, "In time, Joseph and all of his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. And in fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land." 400 years goes by from the time that Jacob moved to Egypt, where Joseph, who was second in command, would take care of his family. Joseph and Jacob and Joseph's brothers all die, and generations go by. 400 years go by. And the 12 families that Jacob had initially, the 12 sons and their families, the 12 families, became known as the 12 tribes. As their families grew, they weren't just a family anymore, they were a full-on tribe. And as they became 12 tribes, they became known as the family of Israel. Jacob's name was changed by God to Israel, which means governed by God. And so now the people of Israel, we see now have an identity for the first time in the Bible. The people of Israel now grow and flourish and are blessed by God. And now it's believed that there would be around 3 million in number. Talk about a family that really grew. That's what happens when you have 12 kids. Families grow to 3 million after 400 years. It's crazy. Talk about population growth. Now, God brought them to Egypt for 2 reasons. I want you to see this. Number 1, you can write this down: to prepare his people for the land of promise. God brought Jacob out of the land he was in to Egypt so that he could prepare his people for the land of promise. Egypt, it was a safe place for God's people. This new nation that God would identify as his chosen people. Well, there was only 70 of them. And they could have been wiped out by an invading army, by marauders. They could have been attacked. And so God brought them to Egypt because there would be protection. Egypt was the world power at this time. No one messed with Egypt. Egypt was the most powerful, prominent military in all of the world at this time. And because of that, God brought them under that protection in a place of a blessed land so that they could prosper and grow into a great nation. But the problem is, although they would have slavery and difficulty, the people would ultimately be ready for the opportunity to leave Egypt and head to the promised land. God knew what would ultimately take place in their lives as they would have to go through incredible difficulty. But the difficulty that we'll see in the upcoming chapters would cause them to have the strength and willingness to leave the place that was so easy and convenient for them, to ultimately get them to the promised land, the land that God has for them. So God brought them there and uses the discomfort of their current condition to stir them on to greater things. And God does the same with you. God will use the discomfort of your current position to cause you to be stirred up for a greater work. And again, that doesn't just mean being called out, but being called up, to be stirred on for greater things. And so God used Egypt to prepare his people for the land of promise, and simultaneously, number two, to prepare the land of promise for his people. While God had his people in Egypt, God was preparing the land for them. How do I know? Well, as we studied through the book of Genesis, in Genesis 15, God actually told Abraham, the grandfather of Jacob, who became Israel, that his descendants would be more than the stars you could see in the sky. And God told Abraham exactly what would happen. God had it all mapped out way ahead of time. God said to Abram in Genesis 15, verse 13, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. And after 4 generations, or 400 years, your descendants will return here to this land. For the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction." God had it all planned out. Hundreds of years previously, telling Abraham exactly the way it would be. God had it all mapped out for his people. But God's GPS, God's perfect sign, GPS, God's perfect sign in directing our lives isn't always the path of the least resistance. But sometimes God takes us in a detour through the difficulties to prepare us for who he wants us to be. But he tells Abraham exactly the way it is. He had it all mapped out. And I hope you get the pun, mapped out, because our series graphic is a map in the background of it if you look closely enough. God had it all mapped out. And in God's map, he told Abraham, I have it planned out. I'm going to take your offspring away. I'm going to tuck them away in a foreign land until the Amorites must be judged. You see, the Amorites were given 400 years to repent. 400 years to turn away from their atrocities and their sin. Some of the most horrendous things that we would not even be able to begin to comprehend in society, things that people get the death penalty for in the United States, wouldn't even compare to the things that they would do that was accepted in their culture. Things that we are following in the ways of Amorites. And I can't even, in a group setting like this, begin to explain the wicked and evil and horrible things that they've done. And God allowed it to go on year after year, decade after decade, century after century, and giving them 400 years to change, to repent, to turn away. Now we think in Bible times 400 years, that's not very long, but that's almost twice as long as the United States has been a country. 400 years to get right. Think about God's patience. But God allowed his own people to go into slavery for several hundred years as they were crying out to God to deliver them. And God watched and waited for the time was right so he would be justified when he would tell his people to go into the land and wipe the people out completely, to exterminate the evil and sins and the atrocities. So when it comes to this exodus that God's people will be on, so many times people say, well, how could God tell them to do such a thing? Because God gave them so much time to repent, but eventually God is a judge, and God will judge a nation for its sin. But we see here being mapped out for Abraham, God had a plan. And I think we would complain a lot less in our lives about the difficulties and the resistance that we go through of our current circumstances if we truly believed that God was completely in control. I hope you realize God has it all mapped out for your life. God has a plan for your life. He has it all mapped out. Our responsibility is simply to walk in the will of God, no matter what it is that he takes us through, because God will be faithful to get us to where we need to be. So after 400 years, God is ready to see his people raised up and brought out of the land of Egypt. So it says in verse 8, eventually a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country. So now there is a new Pharaoh. And it's interesting, it says this Pharaoh knew nothing of who Joseph was. He didn't know the history of his country. He didn't know that Egypt would have been no more if it wasn't for Joseph saving his people because he interpreted a dream of Pharaoh. How Joseph was loyal to Pharaoh and served Pharaoh as second, his right-hand man. He knew nothing of the history of his own country, but sees 2 to 3 million people in the land of the north of them in Goshen, the land that was given to them, and God is blessing them. Their families are growing and they're prospering, and now they even outnumber all the people in Egypt, the Egyptians. And so there is a historical reason that's given to us, and the historical reason for why the people of Israel were enslaved was for military protection. Because of military protection, if they join up with their enemies in the north, that would give them an in, and we will be left undefendable. We can't defend our own land, and we'll be vulnerable, and we can be wiped out. So he has a plan. Let's enslave them, hoping that their enslavement would reduce their population. We're going to treat them brutally, and we're going to tire them out so they'll be too tired to make any more babies. But Pharaoh's plan backfired on them because they were working hard all day, hard all night. They got in really good shape. So they started having more babies. And the population grew even that much more. And so Pharaoh doesn't know what to do. And it goes on to say in verse 11, so the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. You see, the historical reason of this oppression was for military protection, but there's also a spiritual reason to this. Satan has always, from the beginning of time, plotted to destroy God's people throughout history, to try to stop God's plan from coming to pass. Satan is always there trying to destroy what God is doing. But I love this because God always foils Satan's plans while he is fulfilling his own plans. God always foils Satan's plans while fulfilling his own. Do you know how amazing that is in our own lives just to comprehend and understand? When Satan comes against you, when Satan tries to stop what God is doing in your life, when Satan comes to rob, steal, and destroy, God actually uses all of Satan's work for his setup for what God wants to fulfill in your life. And we see that throughout the Bible. Satan trying to destroy God's people, because if Satan can destroy God's people, he can prevent God's promise from being fulfilled. What was God's promise to Abraham? That through your descendants, the Lion of the tribe of Judah will come, the Messiah of the world. And so Satan says, okay, the Messiah that's going to crush my head is going to come through these people. Then I am going to do whatever I can to destroy these people. And throughout history, Satan came against the Jewish people to prevent God's promise from being fulfilled, all the way up into the point where Jesus is on earth, and Satan knows he needs to stop Jesus. So Satan inspires the religious and political leaders to put Jesus to death, and Jesus is in the grave for 3 days, and Satan's going, I won. Yes, I finally did it. I stopped God's plan. And then on the third day, Satan had the worst day of his life, because Jesus broke out of the tomb and said, oh, Satan, really? What you meant for evil, God promises to work in for good. And what you didn't know is I had to die for the sins of the world. My plan was a mystery up until this point, but now it's going to be revealed to all people that I had to die. But death could not hold me. The grave could not keep me. And he burst from the tomb, proclaiming to the world that your sins can be forgiven if you simply believe in him. Satan's plans are always foiled while God's plans are being fulfilled. And so when we go throughout our lives, yeah, I know Satan attacks. I know there's opposition. I know there's difficulty. But just know that God knows exactly how it's all going to work out. And he does the great switcheroo. He takes Satan's plans, what he meant for evil, to rob, steal, and destroy, and he promises to work those together for good. And that's what always happens. So Satan always wanting to destroy God's people, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel. That's how we see throughout the Bible. We see over and over and over again Satan trying to destroy God's people, but God foiling Satan's plan. We see it in the story of Esther with Haman, who would try to destroy the Jewish people. But then that plan backfired, and Haman was punished, and Esther was queen. Just as Satan inspired Herod to destroy all the children, but it backfired. Just as Satan inspired Hitler in more recent years, but it backfired. Because you have to understand, because of the great Holocaust, it was only because of that for a very brief moment of time, seeing the atrocities that were documented post-World War II, of the evil that was done to the Jewish people, where the world for a very short period of time had sensitivity in their hearts for the Jewish person. And with a split vote that barely passed, even after the great atrocities that were done to the people, it was just enough to move the world to vote to give the Jewish people in 1948 their own homeland that they could defend themselves in. That if anybody ever wanted to try to wipe them out again, at least they could try to protect themselves. and against all odds of armies and nations forming together, right as they land in their land to wipe them out, that God intervened on behalf of his people. But we see things like Hitler, inspired by Satan, Haman, inspired by Satan, Herod, inspired by Satan, and in our text today, Pharaoh, inspired by Satan to want to destroy God's people. But we'll see that plan backfired once again. And God actually places a man named Moses in the court of Pharaoh to be raised up underneath Pharaoh, ultimately to be the deliverer of God's people. You see, anti-Semitism is satanic. The root of it and where it comes from. It's the clearest explanation of the things that have happened throughout history, because Satan hates Israel. God loves Israel. So the question is, what side are you on? Satan's side or God's side? God promises to bless those who bless Israel. And in the leaders that we elect, and the leaders that we follow, and the leaders that we side with politically in our own country, are they for Israel or are they against Israel? That will say what side spiritually they're on, whether they're on God's side or they're on Satan's side. Are they satanic policies or are they God-inspired policies? And you can see a very clear test on that simply in who we vote for by if they are for or against Israel. And so not only historically to protect Egypt militarily, not only spiritually because Satan wants to destroy God's plan, but there's a third reason I want us to see today. That's the personal reason. Number 3, the personal reason for you. Why does God allow us to be oppressed? Why does God allow opposition in our lives? Because it's the only way to increase our strength. You see, the only way to increase our strength so that we're not weak is there has to be resistance. There has to be resistance because resistance brings results. It's James chapter 1, verse 2. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Another translation puts it this way: count it all joy when you go through various trials. And initially that can sound like crazy talk. You mean I should just be like, oh, I'm so happy, more problems in my life? No, that's not what James is saying. He's saying to count it all joy when you go through various trials. In other words, when you go through various trials, you can count it joy. And the reason why it says in verse 3, for you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. We can count it joy when we go through various trials, not because of the trials, but what the trials will produce in our own lives. We'll have the endurance. So he says, let it grow. You see, the song Elsa sings in Frozen isn't original because James was singing that 2,000 years ago. Let it grow. Let it grow. These trials aren't going to hold me back anymore. And when we go through those difficulties, we know that those difficulties can produce the endurance so that we can be fully developed, that our growth spiritually wouldn't be stunted. You see, the testing of your faith produces patience. Resistance brings results. We are developed in difficulty. Everything might not be working out like you thought it would. Everything might not be what you expected it to be. It might be hard. It might be a letdown. It might be a disappointment. But God knows what he's doing. God needs to develop the person for the place. At the same time, God develops the place for the person. And in God's perfect timing, when God says it's the right time, when God sees that you've been developed and that you're perfect and complete, not perfect as in perfect, but that you've been perfected, that you've been completed, that you've been fulfilled, needing nothing, he knows that the testing of your faith, it produces what you need in your life. God doesn't allow testings in your life to break you, but to make you into the person he's created you to be. And a faith that cannot be tested cannot be trusted. And so God allows these situations in our life to bring about results in our life, because you are going to be getting stronger because of the resistance you're encountering. So count it all joy when you go through these trials, because it's making you struggle. And the more that you're struggling, man, this band, I think it's like a 5-pound one. It's not hard. But it's a struggle. It's hard. 999, 1,000, and it's painful, and there's tearing, and it's hard. But eventually, this is no big deal for me. I can do this 5-pounder like nothing. Thank you for noticing. Why? Well, I've been working out. And those rubber bands, well, I got to get a thicker one now, because the strength comes from the struggle. Pastor Brenen, I'm struggling right now. I'm struggling with this. I'm disappointed by this. I'm going through this. Is causing me pain and struggle. Let me tell you, dear friend, there's strength that comes from that struggle. And without that struggle, you would never be all that God has for you to be. Through that struggle, you're going to be developed to be the man or the woman that God's created you to be. You just have to not stop struggling. It's when we don't struggle is where the danger is. When we just give in. I'm struggling with this. That's okay. It's okay to struggle. It's when you no longer struggle and just say, you know what, I'm not going to struggle with that anymore. I'm just going to give into it. I'm no longer going to fight against that. I'm no longer going to do better or try to do better. People say, I'm struggling. That's okay if you're struggling. I'm worried about you when you're not struggling, because you're just going down with the tides of society and the easy way of life, and it's just no struggle here. I'm just going with whatever path is easy. But we're called to struggle. But the struggle that doesn't always stay a struggle, because God promises to give us the strength that we need to overcome whatever struggle that we have. And so we can experience the strength of God that comes into our lives because of the struggle. Isaiah 40 verse 31 says, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. And they will walk and not be faint. Trials in our lives are not meant to make us fail, but to show us how far we can fly. C.S. Lewis put it this way: hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. God has an extraordinary destiny for your life, but he has to make you strong enough to be able to handle it. God can't put you in a position that you're not ready for. God can't give you a ministry that you aren't ready for. God can't give you a wife or a husband that you're not ready for. God has to prepare you for the extraordinary he has for your life. He has to prepare you and make you strong enough that you can handle it. He said the greatest characteristic in our lives are often grown in hardships. Not when things are easy, but when things are difficult. That's when the greatest work is produced within our lives. Where there's no strain, there's no strength. Where there's no pain, there's no gain. Where there's no struggle, there is no strength. Why does the Lord allow afflictions in our lives? Because it's what causes our faith to grow. And the more it says they were afflicted. Look at verse 12 again. The more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread or grew. There's multiplication that takes place in our lives when we go through times of difficulty. It's what causes us to grow. And then it says in verse 13, so the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives because his first plan wasn't working of the enslavement, so he had to stop them from growing somehow. So he tells Shipra and Puah, I think she's Hawaiian, Puah, verse 16, when you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is born a boy, kill him. Partial birth abortion. If it's a girl, then let her live. But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. Why have you done this? He demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? They put their lives on the line in order for others to live. And the Hebrew women, they said, are not like the Egyptian women. The midwives replied, they're more vigorous. And they have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time. Because they've been working so hard all these years because of your slavery, and they're just tough. They just pump out babies like nobody's business. And so it says, so God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. You see Pharaoh trying to stop God's people, inspired by Satan to destroy his people, to prevent a deliverer from being raised up. And we'll see Moses now in chapter 2 be born as God raises up a deliverer. Moses picturing, I'm getting so ahead. I want to share chapter 2 with you so bad, but I just don't have the time. Come back next week, because Moses pictures Jesus, the deliverer, leading people out of Egypt, which is a type of the world, as God sent his only begotten son to be born into this world, to be raised up as the deliverer of people out of the world, sin, enslavement, and to be free to live the life that God has called us to live. But I want to leave you with this. We see an important message for the times in which we live. These women were commanded by their governing authority to kill the baby boys. They were disobeying their governing authorities. And when they were questioned about it, they lied and said, we couldn't get there in time. And it says, because of this, God was good to them and blessed them with their own children. These people disobeyed their governing authorities. Well, wait a minute, Pastor Brenen. Doesn't it say in Romans 13, everyone must submit to governing authorities? For all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. Absolutely, and we are to submit to governing authorities, but submission doesn't always mean obedience, because the word of God does not contradict itself. And that's why in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, it says, for the Lord's sake, submit to all human authority, whether the king as head of the state. For the Lord's sake, submit to all human authority, whether the king as head of the state. You see, when those words were written, both Paul to the Romans and Peter in his letter use the word hupotasso, which is translated submit, literally to be subjected. But here's where we go wrong. There's another word, hupokuo, which is best translated obey, which literally means to obey the command of authority. They do not use that word because we are told in the Bible as followers of God that we are to submit to those who God has appointed as authorities in our lives. But we also see both Paul writing to the Romans and Peter in that letter both wrote that after they were arrested in prison for doing what? Breaking the law. So they wouldn't be contradicting. Are they hypocrites? Are Paul and Peter hypocrites? No, it's because we don't understand what the text is actually saying. I am to submit to those in authority over me, to obey the laws of the land. Governmentally, spiritually, parentally, in my family, I am to obey those in authority unless what they are asking me to do violates what God's word says for me to do. Acts chapter 5, the government and religious leaders had Peter and John beaten and threatened them to not preach anymore about Jesus. You're not allowed to do this anymore. Why? Because they literally spread Jesus' name across the whole city. I love that verse. I want to be like Peter and John who spreads Jesus' name across their whole city. Everyone's talking about Jesus. And so they pulled them aside. They beat them. They threatened them. And in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, here's their reply. Peter and the apostles replied, we must obey God rather than any human authority. You see, we are to submit ourselves to the governing authorities, but there's also a higher authority that believers have, and that's the authority of God Almighty. And we, if it comes to a time in our lives, we have to obey God rather than man. As much as we are to respect the governing authorities and what they tell us to do, ultimately the word of God is crystal clear. And I will do what is right. Like those women who risked their own lives, disobeyed Pharaoh to do what is right in God's sight. And although the Bible never condones lying, these women, in spite of their own failings, trying to do what is right, it shows that God honored them and he blesses them with their own families for fighting for the lives of the unborn. There's a lot going on right now politically in our country as it relates to the lives of the unborn. As it relates to submitting to authorities when the authorities are saying to do things that are contrary to the word of God. I think it's so important to understand this important story and principle that we must always obey God rather than man. Whether it's the midwives that were put in a difficult situation, but because they honored God, they were blessed. Or the Jewish families that were in a difficult situation because they did what was right, God blessed them. Or the nation of Israel who was enslaved and treated so brutally. God will take those difficulties and use it to accomplish his plan and his purpose in your lives. Church, you can be developed in difficulty, and God can get you to the point he wants you to be because of difficulty. He's preparing you for the place as he's preparing the place for you. We just have to stay with God, and God will be faithful to get us to where we need to be.